talk about the charter school action, the regulations and oversight that you have implemented or taken in the last week or so. Last week, you announced that you've put 11 charter school authorizers, universities, community colleges, school districts on notice that their ability to add additional schools could be jeopardized, or they're at risk of suspension for not adhering to state laws regarding those regulations. Talk a little bit about what prompted this action and why these particular schools are on your list.
You know, Chad, what actually prompted this was I met with the authorizers last February, and some of the authorizers right in front of others at that meeting said that there's some bad apples here and we need to straighten ourselves out or the whole system's going to go down. Because, you know, there is a place for charter schools in our public school system. They're all public schools. And so that got my attention and said, well, start working on it. And I know their charter authorizer association started and the rest. We also did in our shop. I think what's happening is a couple of misunderstandings. First of all, this is putting those authorizers at risk. That's a designation we use in the department for a lot of things. And there's actually no action taken yet. They've got until October 22nd, I think it is, to get things in order. If they don't, I would suspend their ability to add new charters. It's not anything about charter schools themselves. Charter schools themselves are treated exactly the same way as traditional schools. And that's with, if you remember last Wednesday, we released what's called the top-to-bottom list, which under state and federal law, we have to measure these schools. And if those schools don't do well, that's a whole other set of accountability, no different than traditional schools. But there's plenty of authorizers to authorize schools, even if we have to suspend some, so it wouldn't stop that. And I just think we're trying to make sure that the system brings quality schools and that authorizers are doing the right thing.
What exactly have these authorizers done to not be in compliance? Because there's some argument from some charter school advocates that you are somehow exceeding your authority here.
Yeah, if that takes its own course, then so be it. We believe that I do have that authority. I think it's actually in their interest that I'm getting this on the table now and straightening this out and having the conversation. So even though they're at risk, for example, I've directed our department to meet with the authorizers between now and then. In fact, I think they're meeting very soon. To add, the one area that I think is controversial is we're saying we want to look at your portfolio and their overall academic performance. The thing that I don't want to do inadvertently is they could have low academic performance, for instance, being in the kind of the bottom 10% in the state, if you put their portfolio together. On the other hand, they may be taking on challenges that are very tough. So I want them to find a metric with us that if they're getting improvement, and even though they're low performing, if they're getting improvement, that's good, and let's keep it going. But if they have a low performing portfolio and they're actually getting worse, then what are we doing here? So that one's somewhat controversial, apparently. The others are really, there's some that the law says, for example, they have to have their budget online, and that their schools do. Well, if they have schools they've authorized that aren't doing some of the minimum compliance issues, and there are many that are not, then this is giving them some time to follow those laws, and some of it's just as simple as that.
So if they get in compliance by October 22nd, the risk of suspension will be lifted.
That's right. The risk would be lifted, and that'll be seen. Part of it is I genuinely want our team to work with them. I mean, it's my call in the final analysis on this improvement issue. But as I said, that's probably the one factor that's still hanging, and that's why they're at risk as opposed to just suspending them. And the suspension, again, it's not changing any of the charter schools themselves. It's saying that authorizer X isn't able to add new schools. And I think that's a start that we should do, that I think I have responsibility for. I mean, I wake up every morning, even on a birthday morning, feeling kind of responsible as much and probably more than anyone else in the state for how our kids are doing. And if we aren't creating conditions where all 4,000 of our schools are getting better every day and helping our kids get better every day, I'm responsible to try to change that.
You're used to taking some slings and arrows from your seat, and you've been in public education all your whole career and other superintendent roles. What did you think last week when the Great Lakes Education Project put out this message on Twitter comparing you to Alabama Governor George Wallace, the reputed segregationist.
You know, if I did speaking point type interviews, I'd probably say, "Oh, I let those slings and arrows go." I mean, it hurt a bit, but you know, on the other hand, I have thinner skin than I should, and it's been 9 years. I ought to thicken it up. I would say Gary, for instance, who's there and I think did the tweet. He's a good person. He's trying to do the right thing. I mean, they're at a point where they're frustrated, apparently. So you know, they took the tweet down. I accept that. You know, it's a little painful because some people have said to me, "What's this thing about you and you're like George Wallace?" They don't read the whole darn thing, so that creates a little pain. But you know, it is what it is, and I've been called a lot worse. So, I'm moving on.
Yeah. And you're trying to navigate. There obviously is some political components here that I know you're not political, but it definitely plays into the factor here, especially with the legislature and some of the recent scrutiny of charter schools. I mean, that's kind of probably adding to their frustration as well, I'd imagine.
I guess you know, it's one reason I said at our public board meeting last week, because I am independent of the board and of the governor, as you said earlier, not in an arrogant way. I mean, the board appoints the state superintendent, but there's authorities that are delegated directly in the Constitution to the state sup, and I take them seriously. So I didn't talk to the board or the governor or anyone else or any of their team or the governor's team beforehand, because I really wanted to show and honestly be able to say, these are calls I'm making as state superintendent. I mean, obviously I work with our own team in-house about these things, and I met with the authorizers, I met with stakeholders, and then I made a decision, and that decision was it's time to at least put some of these at risk, give them a chance to get their act together in a fair way, and then if not, we suspend them, and that's a year-by-year suspension. So I'm trying to do that. I don't even think about to be blunt, what the parties are trying to do either way. I can't get in the middle of that. I have a different job.
Mike Flanagan, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, happy birthday, and thank you for joining us here on Michigan's Big Show.